the moment you realize something is wrong, it's already too late. That split second when the air changes, when the familiar becomes foreign, when your own home, your workplace, your empty classroom transforms into a hunting ground where you are the prey. Tonight, I'm delivering 5 documented accounts from real people who experienced terror in the places they thought they knew best. These aren't fiction. These aren't exaggerations. These are testimonies from survivors who lived through their worst nights alone. An empty office building after everyone leaves. A house settling in ways it shouldn't. A night class where the other students have gone, but something else remains. These are the spaces where isolation becomes vulnerability, and vulnerability attracts attention from things that wait for exactly that moment. Before we descend into darkness, subscribe to the Nightmare Index and activate that notification bell so you never miss our weekly terrors. Smash that like button if this content keeps you up at night, and tell me in the comments which story made you check over your shoulder and where you are watching from. Now, let's begin. The elevator arrived at my floor without me pressing the button, and the doors opened to reveal nobody inside. My name is Patricia, and during the winter of 2019, I worked as a junior accountant at a mid-sized financial firm in downtown Chicago. Our offices occupied the 3rd through 5th floors of a 20-story building, with the 3rd floor housing the accounting department, where I spent most of my waking hours. Tax season meant mandatory overtime, while my co-workers with seniority managed to escape by 7 or 8 in the evening. Those of us lower on the ladder often stayed until midnight or later, drowning in spreadsheets and expense reports. The company provided dinner delivery for anyone working past 9, which was their way of acknowledging that they were essentially holding us hostage. On the night of February 12th, I was alone on the 3rd floor by 10 p.m. This wasn't unusual. The building had security in the lobby. The elevators required badge access after hours, and the cleaning crew had already completed their rounds. I had my headphones in, a thermos of coffee at my elbow, and approximately 4 more hours of work ahead of me. The office, after hours, existed in a strange liminal state. During the day, it buzzed with conversation, phone calls, keyboard clatter, and the general white noise of human activity. At night, all of that disappeared, replaced by the hum of ventilation systems and the occasional groan of the building settling against Chicago's notorious wind. I'd grown accustomed to working in this environment. The emptiness didn't bother me. The silence was actually preferable to the chaos of daytime operations. I could concentrate better when I was alone. That night, my concentration broke at approximately 10:47 p.m. The elevator dinged. I pulled out one earbud and turned toward the sound. Our floor had 2 elevator banks, one near the main entrance and another near the emergency stairs at the back. The sound had come from the back elevator, the one almost nobody used because it was slower and slightly out of the way. From my cubicle, I couldn't see the elevator doors directly. A wall of filing cabinets blocked my view, but I heard the doors slide open with their distinctive mechanical whisper. Then nothing. No footfall. No voices. No sound of someone walking onto the floor. I waited, listening. Perhaps a security guard doing rounds. But they typically announced themselves, and besides, they used the main elevator near the lobby entrance. After about 30 seconds of silence, I heard the doors slide closed again. I returned to my work, dismissing the incident as a glitch. Elevators in older buildings developed quirks. Maybe someone on another floor had pressed the wrong button, then realized their mistake before stepping out. 20 minutes later, the elevator dinged again. Same sound, same location, same sequence of doors opening, extended silence, doors closing. This time I stood up. I walked toward the back elevator bank, moving past rows of empty cubicles, their dark monitors reflecting the minimal emergency lighting. The office felt larger at night, the shadows between workstations somehow deeper than they should have been. When I reached the elevator bank, both cars showed they were on the ground floor. The digital display above each door confirmed it. Neither elevator was on 3. Neither had been on 3. But I had clearly heard doors opening on this floor. I stood there for a moment, processing. The building was old, constructed in the 1970s. Perhaps the speakers that announced floor arrivals had malfunctioned, playing sounds from a different floor through our system. I walked back to my desk, unsettled, but determined to finish my work. The third time it happened, I wasn't near my desk. I'd gone to the break room to refill my coffee, a small kitchen area near the center of the floor. The coffee maker was the industrial type, always kept running for the workaholics among us. I was pouring my cup when I heard the elevator ding directly behind me. Except there was no elevator behind the break room. The sound had come from the interior of the floor, from somewhere among the cubicles, from a location where no elevator existed. I set down the coffee pot and listened. Silence, complete and total. Then a soft sound, subtle, like fabric rustling, coming from the direction of my cubicle. I didn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to stay absolutely still, to not make a sound, to not draw attention to my location. The break room had one entrance, and whatever had made that sound was between me and the only exit. The rustling continued. It seemed to be moving, traveling through the cubicle farm in a pattern I couldn't quite trace, sometimes closer, sometimes further, never in a straight line. I spotted the break room's emergency phone mounted on the wall near the refrigerator. Building security could be reached by pressing 0. I moved toward it as quietly as possible. The rustling stopped. I froze, hand extended toward the phone. For approximately 10 seconds, nothing happened. The silence was so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Then, from somewhere terrifyingly close, I heard a whisper. Not words. Not exactly. More like the shape of words, the suggestion of speech without actual content. A susurration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. I grabbed the phone and pressed 0. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Security desk, this is Raymond," I whispered into the receiver, terrified that speaking aloud would invite whatever was out there to find me. "This is Patricia Chen on 3. Someone is on my floor. I can hear them." "Hold on, let me check the cameras," I heard typing on his end. The rustling on my floor had resumed, fainter now, as if whatever caused it had moved away from the break room. "Ms. Chen, I'm looking at 3rd floor cameras right now. All 4 feeds. I don't see anyone except you in the break room. I can hear something moving. It's been happening for almost an hour." More typing. "Let me review the elevator logs. Hold on." I waited, clutching the phone, eyes fixed on the break room entrance. Raymond's voice came back, and something in his tone had changed. "Ms. Chen, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't hang up. I'm coming up personally." "What did you find?" "Just stay on the line. I'll be there in 2 minutes." He didn't answer my question. Those 2 minutes stretched into an eternity. The rustling had stopped completely. The floor was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and my own shallow, terrified breathing. When Raymond arrived, he was accompanied by another security guard I didn't recognize. Both had flashlights. Both looked tense. "Come with us," Raymond said. "We're getting you out of the building." He wouldn't explain anything until we were in the lobby. Only then, with the bright lights and the street visible through the glass doors, did he tell me what the elevator logs had shown. According to the building's security system, the back elevator had made 7 trips to the 3rd floor that evening. 7. I had only heard 3. Each trip showed the elevator arriving empty and departing empty. No badge swipes, no weight registered on the car's sensors, no camera footage of anyone entering or exiting. But here's what made Raymond's face go pale when he told me. The camera footage from the 3rd floor showed something else entirely. On each of the 7 arrivals, for a period of approximately 15 seconds after the doors opened, the camera feeds for the entire floor had experienced visual artifacts. Static, distortion, brief blackouts. When the feeds returned to normal, the elevator doors were always already closed. And in 2 of the recordings, my cubicle had been visible during the blackout's edges. In the first, my chair was empty. In the second, taken at approximately the same time I was hearing rustling from the break room, my chair was occupied. But not by me. I was in the break room. The cameras confirmed it. So whatever was sitting in my chair during that 15-second blackout was something else entirely. I never returned to that office. I called in sick for the rest of the week, then submitted my resignation via email. The company pushed back, threatened consequences. But I didn't care. No job was worth returning to that floor. I've since learned that the building has a history. 2 employees from different companies, on different floors, in different decades, had experienced what they described as anomalous encounters during late-night work sessions. One had transferred to a different city. The other had suffered a complete psychological breakdown and never worked again. Professor Wallace had been dead for 3 years, but someone was still teaching his Thursday night seminar. My name is David, and in the fall of 2017, I was a graduate student at a small liberal arts college in upstate New York. My program required an elective outside my major, and the only course that fit my schedule was an obscure philosophy seminar that met Thursday evenings from 7 to 10 p.m. The class was held in Mercer Hall, the oldest academic building on campus. Built in 1887, it had been renovated multiple times, but still retained the creaking floors, drafty windows, and temperamental heating systems of its Victorian origins. Most departments had long since relocated to newer facilities, leaving Mercer primarily used for storage and the occasional overflow class. Our seminar met in room 312, a small lecture space on the top floor. The room held about 30 seats, but rarely saw more than a dozen students. Night classes at our college weren't popular. Most students preferred to have their evenings free. On the night of October 26th, I was running late. I'd gotten caught up in a research project and lost track of time. By the time I grabbed my bag and sprinted across campus, it was already 7:15. I expected to slip into the back of a class already in progress, endure a disapproving look from the professor, and hope my tardiness wouldn't affect my participation grade. But when I reached room 312, the lights were off. The hallway was dimly lit by ancient fixtures that cast more shadow than illumination. I checked my phone to confirm the date. Thursday, October 26th. Class should absolutely be in session. I tried the door. Locked. I peered through the small window set into the door's upper half. The room beyond was completely dark. No projector glow, no laptop screens, no indication that anyone had been there that evening. I assumed class had been canceled and I'd somehow missed the announcement. I pulled out my phone to check my email, but the campus Wi-Fi in Mercer Hall was notoriously unreliable. No signal. I decided to head downstairs and find somewhere with better reception. But as I turned away from room 312, I heard something that stopped me cold. Voices coming from inside the locked, dark classroom. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear. The voices were muffled, indistinct, but definitely present. Multiple people speaking. Not a conversation exactly. More like recitation. Multiple voices saying the same thing in unison. I knocked on the door. The voices stopped immediately. I waited, expecting someone to come answer. No one did. I knocked again. "Hello, is class meeting tonight?" Silence, complete and utter. Then, from directly on the other side of the door, inches from my face, a single voice spoke. "You're late." It was a male voice, old, scratchy, colored by an accent I couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "My research ran. Over. Is the door locked?" No response. I tried the handle again, still locked. "Could you let me in?" Silence. I stepped back from the door, thoroughly unnerved. Something about the voice had been wrong. Not threatening exactly, but hollow, like words spoken through a very long tunnel. I decided to find the building manager and sort out whatever was happening with the room. I headed for the stairwell at the end of the hallway. The third floor of Mercer Hall contained 6 rooms. As I walked past each door, I noticed something I hadn't registered on my way up. Every single room was dark. Every single door was closed. The entire floor appeared completely unoccupied. But I could hear the voices again. Not from room 312 this time, from room 308. The same quality of sound, multiple voices reciting in unison, words I couldn't quite make out. I stopped outside 308 and listened. The recitation continued for approximately 30 seconds. Then it stopped. A moment of silence. Then, it began again from room 304. The voices were moving, jumping from room to room, traveling down the hallway in my direction. I didn't wait to see what would happen when they reached me. I ran for the stairs, yanking open the heavy fire door and taking the steps 2 at a time. The stairwell was darker than the hallway, lit only by emergency fixtures that provided barely enough visibility to navigate. My footfalls echoed off the concrete walls, impossibly loud in the enclosed space. I burst through the second-floor door, hoping to find students, faculty, anyone. But the second floor was just as empty as the third. Dark classrooms, closed doors. No sign of life anywhere. The voices had followed me. I could hear them now coming from the stairwell I'd just exited. Not the sound of people descending, but the sound of voices. That same unified recitation echoing up from below. They weren't behind me. They were beneath me, between me and the only exit. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my panicked gasps, trying to think clearly. Mercer Hall was old, but it had to have a second stairwell. Fire codes required it. I remembered seeing an emergency exit sign at the far end of the third floor. Another stairwell, a different way out. I started moving, staying close to the wall, trying to minimize the noise of my passage. The second-floor hallway stretched ahead of me, lined with doors that seemed to watch my progress with their small, dark windows. I was halfway to the back stairwell when a door opened beside me. Room 207. The door swung inward, revealing complete darkness beyond. I froze. From inside the room, that same scratchy voice spoke. "The lecture has already begun. Take your seat." I ran. I didn't care about noise anymore. I sprinted down the hallway, crashed through the back stairwell door, and flew down the stairs so fast I nearly fell multiple times. The ground floor was ahead. The emergency exit was in sight. I was going to make it. I slammed into the exit bar. The door didn't move. I tried again, throwing my entire weight against the metal bar. Nothing. The door that should have opened with simple pressure remained firmly, impossibly shut. Behind me, in the stairwell, I heard the recitation begin again. Closer now. Much closer. Coming from just above me, from the landing between first and second floor. I abandoned the emergency exit and ran for the main entrance at the front of the building. The recitation followed, staying just out of sight, always one corner behind me. The main doors were visible ahead, glass panels showing the orange glow of campus lights beyond. Freedom! I hit those doors at full speed, and this time they opened. I didn't stop running until I reached the center of campus, surrounded by students walking to the library or heading back to their dorms. Normal people doing normal things, completely unaware of what I'd just experienced. I filed a report with campus security, but my story was met with polite skepticism. They checked Mercer Hall and found nothing unusual. All doors unlocked properly. No evidence of any disturbance. But during my meeting with the security officer, he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. The Thursday night philosophy seminar had been canceled 3 years ago. It had been canceled because Professor Harold Wallace, who had taught the course for 27 years, had died of a heart attack in room 312 during class on a Thursday night. The course had never been officially rescheduled. The room had never been reassigned. So who had I been corresponding with all semester about my enrollment? Who had been emailing me syllabus updates and reading assignments from a college account that shouldn't have existed? I checked my email history. Every message I'd received about the course was gone, vanished from my inbox and my trash folder as if they'd never existed. I transferred to a different program the following semester. The motion sensor light in my hallway activated at 3 a.m., and I live entirely alone. My name is Karen, and in August of 2021, I was 43 years old, recently divorced, and adjusting to life in a house that suddenly felt much too large. My ex-husband had moved out 6 months prior, and our children were grown and living in different cities. For the first time in over 2 decades, I was experiencing true solitude. The house was a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet New Jersey suburb. We'd bought it when the kids were small, intending it to be our forever home. After the divorce, keeping it felt important. A statement that I wasn't going to let the dissolution of my marriage erase 20 years of memories. But living alone in a family-sized house meant confronting just how much empty space surrounded me every night. I'd developed routines to combat the loneliness. I kept the television running for background noise. I called my daughter every evening. I adopted a cat named Chester, who followed me from room to room as if he understood I needed the company. I'd also installed a sophisticated security system, motion sensors in the hallways, cameras covering the entrances, smart locks that I could control from my phone. The divorce had left me paranoid about security, and the system gave me peace of mind. That peace shattered on the night of August 17th. I'd gone to bed around 11 p.m. Chester curled at my feet as usual. The house was locked, the alarm was set, and I'd confirmed through the app that all sensors were functioning properly. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected. Upstairs hallway. I sat up immediately, heart pounding. The upstairs hallway connected my bedroom to the 3 other bedrooms and the bathroom. For motion to be detected there, something would have to pass directly outside my closed door. I checked the camera feed, but the upstairs hallway camera showed only an empty corridor lit by the nightlight, kept plugged in near the bathroom. Chester was no longer on the bed. That detail registered with a spike of fear. Chester never left the bed at night. He was a creature of absolute routine, and his absence meant something had prompted him to move. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, phone clutched in my hands, watching the camera feed and listening. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Then another notification. Motion detected. Kitchen. My kitchen was on the ground floor. If the hallway sensor had triggered first, and now the kitchen, that suggested whatever had set them off was moving through my house, descending from the 2nd floor to the 1st. I pulled up the kitchen camera. Empty. Counters clean, dishes in the drying rack, refrigerator humming quietly. But the motion sensor didn't lie. Something had passed through that space within the last 30 seconds. I considered my options. Call 911 and potentially waste police resources on a malfunctioning sensor? Search the house myself and risk confronting an intruder? Barricade myself in the bedroom and wait for dawn? I chose a fourth option. I accessed the app's history function and reviewed the motion sensor logs for the past hour. What I found made my throat constrict. The sensors had been activating all night. Living room, 12:47 a.m. Dining room, 1:23 a.m. first floor. Bathroom, 2:08 a.m. Kitchen, 2:41. Back to living room, 2:55 a.m. upstairs. Hallway, 3:17 a.m. Kitchen on 3.8 sign. Something had been moving through my house for over 2 hours, wandering from room to room, traveling between floors. And I had slept through every notification until the most recent one. I checked the cameras again, cycling through each feed. Living room empty, dining room empty, kitchen empty, upstairs hallway empty. Whatever was triggering the sensors wasn't visible on camera. I called 911. The dispatcher was professional and sympathetic. She kept me on the line while officers were dispatched, asking me questions about my location, my security system, and whether I'd heard any sounds. I hadn't heard anything. That was the truly terrifying part. Whatever was moving through my house was doing so in complete silence. The officers arrived within 12 minutes. I watched them approach on the front door camera, spoke to them through the intercom, and remotely unlocked the door from my bedroom. They searched the entire house, every room, every closet, every space large enough to conceal a person. They found nothing, no sign of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been in the house besides me. The windows were locked, the doors were secure. The alarm hadn't been tripped because whatever was moving hadn't opened any entry points. One officer suggested it might be Chester triggering the sensors. Cats were known to set off motion detectors, especially the more sensitive models. But Chester weighed 7 pounds. The sensors were calibrated to ignore anything under 40 pounds. And besides, Chester was hiding under my bed when the officers searched my room. He'd been there, frozen and terrified, for who knows how long. The officers left after securing the house and taking a report. They suggested I contact my security company about potential system malfunctions. They were kind and thorough, but I could tell they thought I was a nervous divorcee jumping at shadows. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. The next morning, I called the security company. A technician came out that afternoon and tested every sensor. Everything was functioning perfectly. No malfunctions, no sensitivity issues, no explanation for the overnight activity. But here's what the technician showed me that the police hadn't noticed. The motion sensor logs didn't just record when sensors were triggered. They recorded the duration of motion detected in each zone. On the night of August 17th, the living room sensor had detected continuous motion for 47 minutes. Something had been in my living room, moving constantly, for nearly an hour. While I slept upstairs, while Chester hid under my bed, the technician couldn't explain it. He upgraded my sensors to commercial-grade equipment and suggested I consider adding more cameras. I sold the house 3 months later. The new owners haven't reported any issues, but I've spoken to the neighbors, casually inquired about the property's history, and learned something that makes me grateful I left when I did. The family who owned the house before us, back in the 1980s, had experienced a similar situation. Motion detectors triggering at night. Unexplained movement through the house. Their teenage daughter had complained about feeling watched when she was home alone. They'd moved after less than 2 years. And the family before them, in the 1970s, hadn't moved. They'd died. All 4 of them, in what was ruled a murder-suicide. The father had apparently walked through the house for hours, one night, room by room, before doing what he did. The police reports from that night described something the officers had found unusual. The family's dog had been discovered hiding under the parents' bed, frozen and terrified, just like Chester. I live in an apartment now, 3rd floor of a building with neighbors on every side. I can hear them through the walls, and that noise that would have once annoyed me now provides profound comfort, because I know what's on the other side of every sound. In that house, in those empty rooms, the sounds came from nothing I could see or explain, and whatever made them is still there, wandering, waiting, triggering sensors in the darkness, looking for the next person foolish enough to live alone in its territory. The announcement system activated at 11 p.m., and the voice that came through wasn't speaking English. My name is Miguel, and in the spring of 2020, I was a senior at a public high school in Southern California. The pandemic had thrown everything into chaos, and while most students transitioned to online learning, a small group of us were permitted to use the school facilities after hours for advanced projects that required specialized equipment. I was building a telescope for my physics capstone, a project that required access to the machine shop and the observatory dome on the school's roof. My advisor had arranged for me to have a key card that granted access from 6 p.m. to midnight, 3 nights per week. Most nights, there were other students in the building. The robotics team sometimes worked late. A few artists used the ceramics studio. We'd wave to each other in the hallways, share vending machine snacks, and generally feel less alone in the massive, empty school. But on the night of March 15th, everyone else had canceled. A storm had been forecast, and sensible students had decided to stay home. I should have done the same, but I was behind schedule on my project and desperate to make progress. I figured a little rain wouldn't hurt anything. By 9 p.m., I was alone in the building. The school was a sprawling campus, typical of California public education. Multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, with the machine shop in the industrial arts wing and the observatory on top of the main building. When fully lit and populated with students, it felt like a small city. When empty and dark, it felt like something else entirely. I worked in the machine shop until around 10:30, grinding lenses and assembling mounting hardware. The storm had arrived by then, rain hammering the roof and wind howling around the building's corners. The weather actually helped my concentration. The white noise drowned out the creaking and settling that empty buildings tend to produce. When I finished my work and packed up my tools, I realized I needed to cross the entire campus to reach the parking lot where my car waited. I gathered my things and stepped into the covered walkway. The walkway connected the industrial arts wing to the main building, a distance of maybe 200 yards. During the day, it was a highway of student traffic. At night, in a storm, with the emergency lighting providing only minimal illumination, it was a tunnel of shadows and rain-splattered concrete. I was about halfway across when the announcement system crackled to life. The school's PA system was old, prone to feedback and static, so when it first activated, I assumed it was just electrical interference from the storm. Then the voice began. It wasn't speaking English. I couldn't identify the language. It sounded old, guttural, with rhythms and sounds that didn't match any language I'd ever heard. But it was definitely a voice, definitely words, definitely being broadcast through every speaker in the school. The announcement continued for approximately 30 seconds, then cut off with a burst of static. I stood frozen in the walkway, rain blowing in through the open sides, trying to process what I'd just heard. The rational part of my brain suggested explanations. A radio signal bleeding into the PA frequency. A prank by the night custodian. Some kind of recorded message from a multicultural event that had somehow triggered. But the night custodian had left at 9. I'd seen his car depart from the machine shop window, and there was no one else in the building. I started walking faster, no longer concerned about getting wet, just wanting to reach my car and get away from this place. The main building loomed ahead, dark windows staring down like empty eyes. That's when I saw the light. Second floor, room 217. A classroom that had been dark moments ago now showed illumination behind its windows. Someone had turned on a light. I stopped walking. The rain soaked through my jacket as I stared up at that window, watching for movement, waiting for some explanation. A figure passed in front of the light. Just a silhouette, visible for perhaps 2 seconds before moving out of frame. A person, standing in a classroom that should have been locked and empty, in a building where I was supposed to be completely alone. The PA system crackled again. This time, the voice spoke English. A single sentence, spoken slowly, with what sounded like great effort. The student will report to room 217. My blood turned to ice. I was the only student in the building. The announcement was for me. Whatever was in that classroom wanted me to come to it. I ran. I abandoned any pretense of courage and sprinted through the rain toward the parking lot. Behind me, the PA system continued to crackle. Bursts of that unknown language interspersed with repeated commands in English. The student will report. The student will report. The student will report. I reached the main building and tore through the doors, knowing I needed to pass through the first floor to reach the exit closest to my car. The hallway stretched before me, lined with lockers and classroom doors, emergency lights casting everything in a sickly red glow. The voice followed me through the speakers, now accompanied by other sounds, distortion, interference, and underneath it all, something that might have been laughter. I was passing room 117 when the door opened. Not quickly, not violently, just a slow, deliberate swing inward, revealing the dark classroom beyond. I didn't stop, didn't look, just kept running. More doors began to open. Room 119, room 121, room 123. Each one swinging inward as I passed, as if the building itself was inviting me to enter. The exit doors were ahead. I could see the parking lot through the glass, my car sitting alone in the rain-soaked expanse. I hit the doors at full speed. They didn't open. I slammed into them with enough force to rattle the frames, but the doors that should have been unlocked, that should have yielded to any pressure from inside, remained firmly closed. Behind me, I heard something that destroyed any remaining composure I had, the sound of dozens of lockers opening simultaneously. I spun around. The hallway stretched behind me, and every single locker door was slowly swinging open. Not randomly, in sequence, starting from the far end and progressing toward my position. Inside each locker was darkness, and in that darkness, something was moving. I threw myself at the exit doors again, screaming, pounding on the glass. The lockers continued to open, the wave of motion advancing toward me. Then, just as the nearest locker door began to swing wide, the exit doors gave way. I fell through into the rain, scrambled to my feet, and ran to my car. I didn't look back, didn't stop moving until I was in the driver's seat with the doors locked and the engine running. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could see the school. Every light in the main building was now on. Every window blazed with illumination that hadn't been there moments before. And in the window of room 217, figures stood watching. I drove home in a daze, violating every speed limit, running every stop sign. I didn't call the police. What would I have said? The PA system spoke to me in tongues. The doors opened by themselves. A building full of ghosts wanted me to attend class. I never went back to that school. I finished my senior year online, telling my advisor I was too concerned about the pandemic to continue using the facilities. The telescope project was never completed. I received an incomplete on my capstone, which nearly cost me my graduation. I didn't care, because sometimes, late at night, When I'm alone and the house is quiet, I can still hear that voice. Not through speakers, not through any electronic device, just a whisper at the edge of perception, speaking words I don't understand, issuing commands I refuse to obey. The photograph above the fireplace changed while I watched, and the face that appeared in it was my own. My name is Elaine, and in December of 2016, I inherited my great-aunt's Victorian home in Massachusetts. I had never met Great-Aunt Harriet. She was a recluse who had severed ties with the family decades before my birth. But apparently, I was her closest living relative when she passed at 96, and her estate had nowhere else to go. The house was a 3-story Victorian dating from 1892, filled with antique furniture, dusty books, and the accumulated belongings of a woman who had lived alone for over 60 years. The estate lawyer suggested I spend a few days cataloging the contents before deciding what to do with the property. I arrived on a Friday evening, planning to stay through the weekend. The house had no modern amenities beyond basic electricity, which had been restored for my visit. No internet, no television, no cell signal in the rural location. Just oil lamps, a wood-burning stove, and the oppressive silence of a home that hadn't hosted a visitor in years. I spent the first evening exploring the first floor, documenting furniture and artwork with a digital camera. The house was immaculately preserved, as if Harriet had simply stepped out and never returned. Teacups sat on lace doilies. Books lay open to marked pages. A layer of dust covered everything. But beneath that dust, the home was frozen in time. The photographs were what caught my attention. They covered nearly every wall, dozens of framed images, spanning what appeared to be multiple generations. Formal portraits in the style of the late 1800s, candid shots from the 1920s and 30s. More recent photographs showing a woman I assumed was Harriet at various ages. Always alone, always in this house. One photograph hung above the fireplace in the main parlor. It showed the exterior of the house, taken from the front lawn, probably sometime in the early 1900s, based on the quality and style. No people in the frame, just the house itself, staring back at the camera. I photographed it along with everything else and continued my work. By 10 p.m., I was exhausted. I'd made a fire in the wood stove, arranged some bedding on a settee in the parlor, and resigned myself to an uncomfortable night. The bedrooms on the upper floors felt too isolated, too far from the exit. At least in the parlor, I was near the front door. I fell asleep watching the fire die down. I woke to complete darkness. The fire had gone out. The oil lamp I'd left burning on the side table had extinguished, and the silence of the house had changed somehow, becoming thicker, more present. I fumbled for my phone to check the time. 2:17 a.m. The screen's glow seemed anemic in that darkness, barely pushing back the shadows. That's when I noticed the photograph above the fireplace. Something about it was different. I turned on the phone's flashlight and pointed it at the frame. The image had changed. It still showed the house exterior, still captured from the same angle, still possessed the same antique quality. But now there was a figure in the frame. A woman, standing in one of the second-floor windows, looking down at the camera. I stared at the photograph, trying to process what I was seeing. Photographs didn't change. Images captured on paper remained static. This was impossible. But the woman was definitely there. A pale face in a dark window, features too small to make out clearly, but unmistakably present. I approached the fireplace slowly, keeping my light trained on the image. The closer I got, the more detail I could make out. The woman was wearing something white, a nightgown perhaps. Her hair was dark and long, and her posture suggested she was watching. Not just looking, watching. with intention. I reached up to remove the photograph from the wall. The moment my fingers touched the frame, every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously. The sound was deafening in the midnight silence. Front door, parlor door, kitchen door. Doors I hadn't even noticed, all slamming with enough force to rattle the windows. I screamed and stumbled backward, dropping my phone. The flashlight went out when it hit the floor, plunging me back into absolute darkness. I could hear something now, a sound that made no sense in the context of an empty house. Movement, not from the doors, from above, from the second floor. Someone was walking through the upstairs hallway. I scrambled for my phone, found it by touch, and discovered the flashlight function no longer worked. The screen still glowed, but the camera flash was dead. The sounds from upstairs continued. Slow, deliberate movement, traveling from one end of the hallway to the other, then descending the stairs. The staircase in this house was visible from the parlor doorway. I could see the bottom steps if I looked into the foyer. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to curl into a ball and pretend nothing was happening. But I couldn't stop myself. I crept toward the parlor doorway, phone held before me like a talisman. The screen's pale light barely reached the foyer beyond. The sounds on the stairs had stopped. I stood in the doorway, staring into the darkness, waiting for something I couldn't name. A voice spoke from directly beside me. "You shouldn't have touched it." I spun toward the sound. Nothing. Empty space. Just the shadows of the parlor and the dead fireplace. But when I turned back to the foyer, someone was standing at the bottom of the stairs. A woman in white. Dark hair. Features still obscured by darkness, but posture unmistakable. Watching. I bolted for the front door, abandoning any pretense of courage. My hands found the handle, twisted, pulled, locked. I pulled again, threw my weight against the wood. The door held fast. The lock wouldn't turn. The deadbolt, which I was certain I hadn't engaged, refused to move. Behind me, I could hear movement. Slow, patient, approaching. I ran for the kitchen, the back door. Any exit. The kitchen was dark, unfamiliar. I crashed into furniture, knocked over what sounded like dishes. My hands found the back door, found the handle, pulled, locked. The windows. I grabbed a chair and swung it at the nearest glass. The chair bounced off as if the window were made of stone. The movement behind me had reached the kitchen doorway. I turned, pressing myself against the window, phone raised. The screen's glow illuminated a face. Pale, female, old, but not ancient. Features that were familiar in a way I couldn't place. And eyes that weren't looking at me. They were looking at my phone, specifically at my reflection in the phone's black screen. I glanced down involuntarily. In the reflection, I saw myself. But my reflection was wearing white. My reflection had dark hair, though my own hair is light. My reflection was smiling, though my own face was frozen in terror. And my reflection was reaching toward me from inside the glass. I threw the phone away from me. It hit the floor, and the screen finally went dark. In the absolute blackness that followed, I heard the voice again. "Now, you'll remember too." I must have fainted. I woke on the kitchen floor at dawn, sunlight streaming through windows that now looked perfectly normal. The back door was unlocked. The front door was unlocked. The house was silent and empty. I left immediately, not even bothering to collect my belongings. And those were 5 true accounts from people who discovered that being alone isn't always what it seems. The office worker who learned that empty floors hold occupants the cameras refused to show. The graduate student who enrolled in a class taught by someone who should have been in the ground. the divorcee whose home was never truly hers to begin with, the senior who found out his school held lessons no living teacher could give, and the heir who became part of a collection she never agreed to join. These individuals shared their experiences so that you might recognize the warning signs they missed, the elevator that arrives without being summoned, the voice on the intercom that shouldn't exist, the motion sensor that detects what your eyes cannot see, the door that opens when no hand touches it, the photograph that captures more than the moment. If any part of these accounts resonated with something you've experienced, something you've never been able to explain, something that happened when you were completely alone, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments below. Your nightmare might become our next episode. And if you're still watching, still listening, still here in the dark with me, you've earned your place among the fearless. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a descent into terror. And share this video with someone who thinks they're brave enough to handle what we deliver every week. Because the Nightmare Index never closes. We're always here, waiting in the dark. Until next time, sleep well if you can,